The moment the first flashbulb went off in Paris, the city paused. The Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, had arrived, draped head to toe in a crisp white ensemble that screamed both defiance and luxury. She strutted into the Balenciaga Spring-Summer 2026 show like it was her royal redemption arc. Cameras clicked, fans gasped, and critics sharpened their knives. But beneath the gloss and glamour of Paris Fashion Week, a different kind of story was unfolding. One that had nothing to do with couture and everything to do with a $10,000 unpaid hotel bill. Because while Meghan was being hailed as a vision of modern elegance, somewhere in the back corridors of one of Paris's most exclusive hotels, a manager was flipping through an unpaid invoice, muttering a name that had suddenly become off-limits: Madame Markle. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What really happened inside that suite? Who was supposed to pay? And why did Netflix, of all companies, get dragged into the mess? This isn't just about a missing payment. This is about image, control, and power. And this latest scandal might just be the moment the fragile alliance between Meghan Markle and Netflix finally begins to crack. Imagine it. Paris in September, city of romance, runway, and ruthless reputation. Every major fashion name in the world had gathered for Balenciaga's latest show, where exclusivity is currency and perfection is law. Meghan's arrival wasn't merely a celebrity sighting. It was a calculated reintroduction. After months of silence, she wanted to make a statement that she was still relevant, still royal, still unstoppable. And at first glance, she succeeded. The cameras adored her. The white suit shimmered. The high bun, the silver clutch, the subtle diamond earrings. Every detail screamed money, confidence, control. She waved, smiled, laughed, all carefully timed, all meticulously rehearsed. But behind those dazzling photos was chaos. Sources whisper that Meghan's team had been scrambling all week to secure her accommodations in Paris. The hotel? A legendary establishment known for hosting the world's most powerful presidents, designers, monarchs, even Hollywood elites. The kind of place where one night's stay can buy you a car. And that's where things began to unravel. According to insiders, Meghan's team initially believed Netflix would foot the bill. After all, the trip was reportedly tied to upcoming content discussions and potential brand partnerships. But Netflix saw it differently. They considered it a personal appearance, not a professional one. That single misunderstanding, or maybe manipulation, lit the fuse that would soon explode into a PR disaster. Now, here's the part that no one wants to talk about. The moment the bill landed at checkout. Reports suggest that Meghan's staff hesitated. The invoice, totaling around $10,000, included luxury suite charges, spa services, private dining, and driver fees. Yet, when the front desk requested payment authorization, Meghan's assistant allegedly replied, "It's being handled through Netflix." Except it wasn't. Within hours, confusion turned into confrontation. The hotel's finance department reportedly reached out to Netflix's corporate office in Los Angeles for confirmation. But Netflix's response was blunt. "This is not part of our production contract." Imagine being the hotel manager reading that reply, realizing that the Duchess of Sussex, who had just graced the front page of every fashion magazine, had left without paying. The situation escalated fast. French staffers, bound by discretion but fueled by frustration, began leaking details to entertainment journalists. They described a miscommunication that didn't feel accidental, a guest who expected royal treatment without the royal account. And while the public didn't yet know, Netflix did. And they were furious. This wasn't just about money. It was about optics. Netflix had already faced months of criticism for its multi-million-dollar deal with Meghan and Harry. A deal many felt failed to deliver results. The Harry and Meghan documentary had lost momentum. Archetypes, Meghan's podcast, was canceled after one season. Netflix executives had quietly begun distancing the company from the Sussex brand, focusing on new royal-related projects without their direct involvement. And now, here was another headline waiting to explode. Netflix forced to cover Meghan Markle's unpaid hotel bill. For a platform already struggling to manage PR crises and executive shakeups, this was the last thing they needed. Behind the scenes, emails started flying between Netflix's legal, PR, and finance departments. Should they pay to avoid embarrassment? Should they deny involvement entirely? Or should they confront Meghan's team privately before this turned into another public spectacle? The answer, apparently, wasn't so simple. Because according to a well-placed industry insider, Meghan's representatives argued that the trip was linked to her brand development and production scouting, both of which, they claimed, fell under Netflix's deal terms. They insisted Netflix was contractually obligated to cover costs associated with her public image efforts. But Netflix disagreed. They pointed to specific contract clauses limiting coverage to approved events directly related to official productions. The Balenciaga show, they argued, was not one of them. So, what began as a misunderstanding quickly became a standoff. Meanwhile, Paris had moved on to the next fashion event. But Meghan's name lingered in the air, whispered through corridors and cafes. La Duchesse Américaine. They called her, half admiration, half mockery. The irony? Meghan had gone to Paris to reclaim her image, to show she was still relevant in the high society she'd once abandoned. Instead, she found herself at the center of yet another scandal, one that turned her fairy tale appearance into a financial farce. And as her team scrambled to contain the narrative, Netflix quietly took notes. This wasn't their first issue with Meghan, but it was fast becoming the most public one. They'd tolerated the constant delays, the creative clashes, the diva rumors. But unpaid hotel bills? That was a line even Hollywood wouldn't cross. It was a wake-up call, not just for Netflix, but for Meghan too. Because no matter how polished her image, how controlled her narrative, how strategic her appearances, the truth has a way of leaking out, especially in the digital age. And this time, it wasn't a random rumor. It was a paper trail. Invoices, emails, receipts, real numbers. The kind of evidence that even Meghan's media machine couldn't spin away. So the question now became, who would break first? The streaming giant trying to salvage its reputation, or the Duchess trying to preserve hers? Because behind that serene Parisian smile was a woman under pressure, from the press, from Netflix, and from a crumbling brand empire built on image over substance. And Netflix, known for playing the long game, wasn't going to stay silent forever. In fact, sources suggest that the very next day, an internal memo circulated through Netflix's executive offices in California, quietly hinting at cost review discussions regarding high-profile talent expenditures. It didn't name names, but everyone knew who it was about. That memo would later leak. And once it did, the internet exploded. From Hollywood to London, Paris to Sydney, the question echoed. Did Meghan Markle really leave a $10,000 bill unpaid in one of the most prestigious hotels in Europe and expect Netflix to clean it up? Some defended her. It's a misunderstanding. She's being targeted again. Others mocked her. Royalty on a budget. But all agreed on one thing. It was yet another reminder that Meghan's relationship with fame and responsibility was far more complicated than it appeared. And that's exactly where the next chapter begins. Inside the luxury Parisian suite where it all started. Because while the world saw designer gowns and diamond smiles, hotel staff saw something else. A guest whose entourage left behind more questions than answers. And as the dust settled, the hotel made a decision that would shock everyone, including Netflix. What they did next would turn a quiet billing dispute into an international scandal. Because Paris doesn't forgive unpaid debts. And Netflix doesn't forgive embarrassment. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The cameras caught her before the crowd even noticed. A sudden frenzy of flashing lights. A ripple of gasps across the front row. And then, silence. Meghan Markle had arrived. It was Paris Fashion Week, Balenciaga's Spring-Summer 2026 show, and the air was thick with ego, perfume, and expectation. The runway wasn't even open yet, but every lens in the room had already turned toward one figure. The Duchess of Sussex, dressed in an immaculate white two-piece ensemble that seemed designed to make the world stop and stare. White, a color of purity, of renewal, of reinvention. But also, for some, a symbol of irony. Because while Meghan smiled and waved to the crowd, rumors whispered through the audience like a secret wind. Who invited her? One fashion editor reportedly murmured. Was she with Balenciaga? Or was this another one of her appearances? And yet, despite the murmurs, Meghan was magnetic. She moved with the precision of someone who knew she was being watched. Every step, Every turn of her head, deliberate, calculated, controlled. She was no stranger to scrutiny. But this time, she wanted to command it. Paris was supposed to be her stage, a chance to reclaim the narrative after months of silence. Since the Spotify fallout and Netflix's quiet distancing, Meghan had been fading from the front pages. This was her chance to remind the world who she was. Or rather, who she wanted them to believe she was. The former actress, the Duchess, the humanitarian, the global icon. But beneath that radiant composure was a woman trying desperately to reframe her story. It had been almost 3 years since she and Harry had stepped back from royal duties. In that time, their popularity had risen and plummeted like a heartbeat, adored one month, criticized the next. Their Netflix docuseries had delivered big numbers, but it came at a cost. Public sympathy for the royal family had grown, while the Sussexes' credibility had begun to erode. So when Meghan appeared in Paris, it wasn't just another celebrity sighting. It was a statement, bold, expensive, and intentional. But what the cameras didn't catch that night were the people running behind the scenes, the stylists, the assistants, the PR strategists, each one scrambling to make sure everything looked effortless. Nothing was effortless in Meghan's world. Every outfit, every smile, every photograph had to serve a purpose. Inside the Balenciaga venue, the atmosphere was electric. The front row gleamed with celebrities: Kim Kardashian, Nicole Kidman, Dua Lipa, Bella Hadid, each one a headline magnet in their own right. But Meghan's presence caused a subtle shift in energy. Some smiled politely. Others avoided eye contact. A few whispered behind fans and clutches. To the public, it looked glamorous. To insiders, it was tense. Because everyone knew, Meghan wasn't officially invited by Balenciaga. Not in the traditional sense. Sources suggest her appearance came through a friend-of-a-friend connection, a PR executive who owed her team a favor. The brand itself, caught between diplomacy and discomfort, allowed her attendance but didn't seat her in the traditional celebrity section. Still, Meghan made sure she stood out. Her outfit was striking, minimalist yet commanding. The crisp white blazer, cinched at the waist. The high-waisted trousers that shimmered under the flashing lights. A statement clutch. And that unmistakable confidence that said, "I belong here." But belonging, as Meghan would soon learn, doesn't always mean acceptance. The murmurs started small. Is she collaborating with Balenciaga? Did she come on her own? Was Netflix filming this? Because that was the question everyone kept asking. Was Netflix paying for all this? You see, Meghan's public appearances had become complicated since her multi-million-dollar deal with the streaming giant. There were always questions about who funded her wardrobe, her travel, her security. And Paris, one of the most expensive cities in the world, was no exception. At the Ritz-style hotel where Meghan stayed, her entourage reportedly occupied multiple rooms. Her assistant handled scheduling, her stylist oversaw fittings, and her PR manager coordinated interviews and photographers. Every move was choreographed, every detail budgeted. But the key issue, who was covering the costs, was never clearly defined. According to one insider, her team assumed Netflix would reimburse the expenses because the Paris trip was tied to a branding initiative. But Netflix didn't sign off on any Paris-related project. That gap, that single assumption, would soon spiral into a storm. But for now, in that moment, Meghan was radiant. As the Balenciaga show began, she took her seat near the middle rows, flanked by stylists and quietly watched by paparazzi. She crossed her legs, tilted her head, and smiled. The cameras adored her. The lighting did her favors. And for a fleeting moment, she was winning again. The models stormed down the runway, dark silhouettes, avant-garde cuts, dramatic music echoing through the hall. Meghan clapped at the finale, posed for a few official photos, and then disappeared backstage for what appeared to be a brief meet and greet. But here's where the story shifts. Because while Meghan was backstage chatting with stylists and photographers, the hotel concierge had already left 3 missed calls on her assistant's phone. The reason? A payment discrepancy. The suite she'd checked into, one of the hotel's most exclusive, was billed under her media company, Archwell Productions. But the card details didn't match the account on file. The payment was pending. The manager assumed it was an oversight. But when he tried to confirm the payment authorization, Meghan's assistant reportedly said, "Netflix handles our international expenses." Except Netflix had no record of it. The moment that revelation reached the hotel's finance desk, they froze the account. No more room charges, no extensions, and no discretion if the issue wasn't resolved. By the time Meghan's convoy pulled back into the hotel after the fashion show, the mood had changed. Staff greeted her politely, but not warmly. Something was off. She noticed. Her team noticed. But the show had drained everyone. Meghan smiled faintly and went up to her suite. Later that night, she ordered room service, champagne and fruit, unaware that the kitchen had hesitated before fulfilling the order. The bill had already crossed into dispute territory. Meanwhile, word of the situation started leaking through the staff network. Paris hotels operate like living organisms. Chefs, concierges, and porters talk, often in whispers. And when the name Markle appeared on an unpaid ledger, it didn't stay quiet for long. By sunrise, at least 3 journalists in Paris had caught wind of the situation. None could confirm it yet, but all were intrigued. One entertainment columnist even tweeted cryptically, "Paris Fashion Week isn't over, but one royal guest might wish it were." And that's how it began. Not with a confrontation, but with a whisper. But whispers, when attached to Meghan Markle, travel faster than sound. Her PR team immediately sensed danger. They began damage control, calling the hotel, reassuring them payment was processing, sending internal emails to Netflix for clarification, and even briefing Meghan on potential talking points in case the story leaked. Yet the cracks were forming, because Netflix's silence spoke volumes. There was no approval, no promise of reimbursement, no sign that they were stepping in. And within her own team, panic turned to frustration. Some blamed the assistant for miscommunication. Others blamed Netflix for embarrassing Meghan. A few quietly wondered why a woman worth millions couldn't just pay the bill herself. But the truth ran deeper. Meghan's image wasn't just her brand, it was her currency. Every public appearance was an investment in perception. If she paid out of pocket, it might appear personal. But if Netflix covered it, it looked professional. And for Meghan, that distinction was everything. So rather than resolve the issue directly, her team stalled, buying time, crafting narratives, waiting to see who would blink first. But in the world of luxury hotels, patience is expensive. By the second day, the unpaid bill had reached senior management. And when they saw the name on the account, Archwell Productions, one executive made a bold move. He reached out directly to Netflix's Los Angeles office, bypassing Meghan's team entirely. The message was formal but unmistakably frustrated. "We require confirmation of payment for Ms. Markle's suite stay, as your company is listed as the billing reference. Kindly advise at your earliest convenience." Netflix's response arrived less than 2 hours later, and it changed everything. Netflix has no financial responsibility for Ms. Markle's accommodations in Paris, the email read. This event was not part of any approved production or promotional activity. That single paragraph, polite, precise, and final, was the spark that ignited the upcoming media explosion. But for now, as Meghan's team sat in her suite unaware of the brewing firestorm, she was still smiling for the cameras. She still believed Paris had gone perfectly. What she didn't know was that while she was preparing for dinner with a designer friend, her name had just landed in the inbox of Netflix's PR department, attached to the words "unpaid invoice." And that's how Paris, her city of style and redemption, turned into the scene of her next humiliation. Because behind the curtains of glitz and glamour, behind the filtered photos and choreographed poses, the truth was waiting to surface. And this time, even her most loyal allies might not be able to hide it. But what came next, when the hotel decided to escalate and Netflix decided to respond, would turn one unpaid bill into an international headline no one could ignore. And for Meghan Markle, the real show was only just beginning. It began like any other morning in Paris. Sunlight slipping through gold curtains, the scent of freshly brewed coffee in the air, and the faint hum of city traffic below. But inside one of the city's most exclusive hotels, there was a tension you could almost taste. Because behind the glamour, behind the polished marble floors and crisp uniforms, the staff were whispering about one name. Markle. Not a queen, not a politician, but a guest who had, in less than 72 hours, become the hotel's most talked-about mystery. At first, no one wanted to believe it. After all, Meghan Markle was no ordinary visitor. She was the Duchess of Sussex, a woman accustomed to red carpets, private jets, and billion-dollar brand partnerships. She was supposed to represent sophistication and stability, not unpaid bills. And yet, the truth was undeniable. The invoice sat quietly on the finance director's desk. Room, royal suite, top floor. Stay 4 nights. Total, €9,300, excluding late-night room service and private driver charges. Payment status, pending. The document looked innocent, just a few lines of text and a signature. But to those who had worked in luxury hospitality long enough, that word pending was a warning bell, especially when the name attached carried global recognition. One staffer would later tell a gossip columnist, "We thought it was a delay." But when the assistant said, "Netflix will handle it," that's when eyebrows started raising. Because Netflix doesn't usually handle hotel bills for celebrities, unless it's production-related. So the investigation began quietly. The finance team reached out to Archwell Productions, the company name listed under Meghan's reservation. No response. Then they reached out to the card provider listed on file. Declined, due to authorization limits. Then finally, the call that changed everything. A direct email to Netflix corporate, referencing Meghan's stay, invoice number, and travel purpose. 2 hours later, the reply came in from Los Angeles. It was polite, it was professional, and it was damning. Netflix has no financial responsibility for Ms. Markle's accommodations in Paris, the email read. This visit was not associated with any active production or promotional event under Netflix's purview. That was the moment the hotel realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a scandal waiting to erupt. Think about it. This wasn't a small boutique hotel tucked away in a quiet arrondissement. This was one of Paris's crown jewels, the kind of establishment where a single Instagram photo could send bookings soaring. They catered to monarchs, billionaires, and A-list stars. Their reputation was priceless. And now, that reputation was tied to a duchess who hadn't paid her bill. The internal chatter grew frantic. Managers debated how to handle it. Some argued for silence. It's Meghan Markle. She'll pay once her team sorts it. Others pushed for immediate escalation. If we don't act, the press will. And that's when a quiet call was made to Meghan's assistant. It was late evening when the assistant answered, her voice calm but clipped. Yes, the Duchess is aware of the invoice. It's being processed through her production partner. But when the hotel pressed for confirmation, she hesitated. Her tone shifted. And that hesitation was all the hotel needed to realize something wasn't adding up. Because if Netflix wasn't involved and Archwell wasn't responding, who was responsible? What followed over the next 24 hours was a masterclass in quiet panic. Meghan's team went silent. Calls went unanswered. Emails bounced between PR managers, accountants, and personal assistants. Everyone was waiting for someone else to take responsibility, but no one did. And behind closed doors, Meghan herself was reportedly livid. Sources close to her circle claimed she was humiliated by the confusion and blamed her team for the oversight. Others said she brushed it off, insisting the media would never find out. But they always do, especially when French hotel workers talk. By the third day, whispers had spread beyond the hotel. A Parisian gossip blog posted a blind item titled, "Famous Actress Turned Royal Leaves Paris Luxury Hotel in a Rush, Staff Still Waiting for Payment." The post didn't name names, but it didn't have to. The clues were obvious. White outfit, Fashion Week, Duchess energy. It took less than 2 hours for the comment section to explode with speculation. And then, in a twist no one expected, Netflix's name entered the narrative. According to entertainment reporters, someone within the hotel's circle mentioned that Netflix had been contacted about the payment and refused. Within hours, media headlines were forming their own storyline. Netflix denies responsibility for Meghan Markle's Paris stay. $10,000 bill sparks clash between Duchess and streaming giant. Paris hotel in diplomatic limbo after royal guest dispute. That's all it took. The story began to snowball, not because of the money, but because of what it represented. Meghan had spent years crafting an image of control. She was polished, articulate, composed, someone who understood branding better than most Hollywood stars. But this incident painted a different picture, one of disorganization, entitlement, and miscommunication. And Netflix? They were furious. Inside their Los Angeles headquarters, executives reportedly exchanged terse messages. "We can't keep cleaning up after her," one insider claimed. Another allegedly wrote, This will hurt our brand. She's a liability now. It wasn't just about one unpaid invoice. It was about everything that led up to it. Because for Netflix, Meghan wasn't just another celebrity partner. She was an investment. A multi-million-dollar gamble that had yet to yield consistent returns. The Harry and Meghan documentary had drawn massive viewership, yes, but it also triggered backlash. The follow-up projects had underperformed. Meghan's podcast deal with Spotify had collapsed in embarrassment. Public opinion had shifted. And now this. A luxury bill dispute? It was the last thing Netflix wanted on its front page. So, they made a choice. Distance. Netflix's PR team quickly crafted a statement for internal circulation. Neutral, factual, and void of emotion. Netflix is not responsible for any personal travel or expenses incurred by talent outside the scope of active production agreements. Simple, but pointed. They didn't need to name her. The implication was clear. Meanwhile, back in Paris, hotel management had had enough. The fourth night passed. The bill remained unpaid. And when Meghan's assistant called to extend their stay by one more day, the hotel declined. That's when reality hit. Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, had effectively been frozen out of one of Paris's most elite hotels. Not for who she was, but for what she hadn't done. And yet, somehow, the worst was still to come. Because when her team tried to quietly resolve the issue by wiring payment from a separate account, the transfer failed. The bank flagged the transaction due to mismatched company details. It was a logistical nightmare, and the staff knew it. One senior employee would later say, "We didn't want to embarrass her, but it reached a point where our integrity was on the line. Paris is a small world. People talk. If we let this go, it would become a precedent." So they acted. They compiled all documents, invoices, emails, authorizations, and filed an internal incident report. That report, meant to stay private, eventually found its way into the hands of a British entertainment correspondent. Within a day, the headline was everywhere. Paris hotel demands payment from Duchess of Sussex. Netflix denies involvement. That's when the story stopped being about money and became about reputation. The internet split into camps. Meghan's supporters accused the media of targeting her again. She's being harassed over a technicality, they argued. But her critics saw it differently. How does someone with millions forget to pay a hotel bill? And in between those two extremes was the truth. Messy, unglamorous, and revealing. Because while Meghan's camp scrambled to call it a misunderstanding, insiders from both Netflix and the hotel painted a darker picture. One of entitlement, mismanagement, and corporate frustration. It wasn't the first time a celebrity had left unpaid bills behind, but it was perhaps the most symbolic. For years, Meghan had positioned herself as a voice of empowerment, independence, and accountability. Yet here she was, accused of leaving others to clean up her mess. And the irony didn't go unnoticed. Even former royal aides, who had worked with her during her time in the UK, reportedly exchanged knowing glances. Old habits die hard, one said anonymously. But beyond the gossip, the real damage was unfolding privately. Netflix's trust had been shaken. The hotel's reputation was now attached to controversy. And Meghan's carefully rebuilt public image, after so many months of silence, was cracking again. Her Paris trip, once meant to symbolize her rebirth, was now the latest chapter in a growing narrative of missteps and overreach. And just as her team thought they could contain the story, one more headline dropped like a thunderclap. A leaked internal memo from Netflix's finance department hinted at unapproved expenditures linked to contracted talent. It didn't name Meghan, but everyone connected the dots. The world was watching. The palace was listening. And Netflix, silent but seething, was preparing its next move. But before any corporate response could be drafted, the hotel made its own. In a bold, unprecedented step, the hotel's communications director issued a brief statement to French media outlets. It didn't accuse anyone directly. It simply read, "We pride ourselves on excellence and transparency. All guests are treated equally, and all accounts are expected to be settled according to standard policy." Elegant, impersonal, devastating. Because in the world of Paris luxury, silence isn't neutral, it's condemnation. And as that statement circulated across news outlets and social media, the Duchess of Sussex found herself once again at the center of global scrutiny. One bill, one misunderstanding, one echo that refused to fade. But the story didn't end there, not even close. Because what Netflix did next, and how Meghan's team reacted, would transform this private embarrassment into a full-blown corporate clash. And when the leaked memo finally hit the press, even Meghan's closest allies couldn't defend what came next. But what happened inside Netflix's California office that week would shock even her most loyal supporters and set the stage for the most explosive fallout yet. Because when money meets image and royalty meets Hollywood, someone always pays the price. And this time, it wouldn't be who anyone expected. Inside Netflix's sleek glass headquarters in Los Angeles, the mood was electric, but not in the good way. Emails were flying, phones were buzzing, and somewhere between the PR office and the executive floor, a crisis was being born. The Duchess of Sussex, one of their most high-profile partners, had just become a financial liability. It all started with that single forwarded email from Paris. A polite message from the hotel's management asking, with thinly veiled exasperation, if Netflix could confirm payment authorization for Ms. Markle's accommodations. Attached were itemized expenses for nights in a royal suite, spa services, driver fees, and private in-room dining totaling nearly $10,000. $10,000. For a company worth billions, it was pocket change. But for Netflix, it wasn't about the number. It was about what it represented. A pattern. Over the past 2 years, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's partnership with Netflix had gone from historic to problematic. What was once touted as a groundbreaking collaboration, content that uplifts and inspires, had become, internally, a cautionary tale of mismatched expectations. When the Sussexes first signed their reported $100 million deal in 2020, Netflix executives believed they were buying the modern royal story, global, glamorous, human. They saw potential for documentaries, dramas, children's programming, the works. But what they got was complicated. Yes, the Harry and Meghan docuseries had shattered viewing records. But it also polarized audiences, drawing equal parts sympathy and scorn. Critics accused it of self-importance. Executives whispered that it had alienated viewers in the UK. Still, the show brought attention, and attention was currency. But after that, the magic faded fast. Their next project, Live to Lead, underperformed. Archewell's proposed ideas. A cooking show, a wellness docu-series, and a charity spotlight, all stalled in early development. Meetings were missed. Budgets ballooned. Creative directions shifted so often that one executive privately dubbed the Archewell partnership a royal headache. And now, this hotel incident. An unpaid bill, international headlines, and Netflix's name dragged into a scandal it didn't cause. By the time the internal memo hit the inboxes of senior staff, the tone was clear. Effective immediately, all Archewell-related expense approvals must undergo secondary review from finance and legal. Any requests tied to personal travel are to be denied without explicit written confirmation of production linkage. Translation? No more blank checks for the Duchess. Inside the conference room on the 15th floor, a handful of executives gathered for what would become an unspoken turning point. Among them were Netflix's head of global communications, the director of talent partnerships, a senior member from legal, and 2 people from finance. The topic on the table, Meghan Markle's Paris situation. The atmosphere was tense. The PR head broke the silence first. "This is small, but it's not small," she said. "If we ignore it, it festers. If we pay it, it sets a precedent." Finance replied bluntly, "She's not our responsibility. The contract doesn't cover her personal travel. Paying would mean admitting fault." Legal nodded. "It's not just about payment. It's liability. If the media frames this as Netflix cleaning up her mess, it damages our credibility. We're not her bank." But then came the counterpoint from the partnership's director. "Publicly cutting ties with her isn't an option either. Whether we like it or not, she's still global news. This story can blow over, or it can blow up. It depends on how we handle her." And that was the dilemma. Meghan wasn't just another celebrity partner. She was part of Netflix's brand identity. The company had tied itself to her story. The underdog royal who broke free, the modern woman challenging the establishment. If she fell, some of that fallout splashed onto Netflix too. They were in too deep to walk away cleanly, but too frustrated to stay quietly complicit. So the question became, damage control or detachment? Behind the scenes, PR teams drafted possible strategies. Option 1. A discreet payment through an intermediary, no press release, no trace. Option 2. A firm denial of financial responsibility, but accompanied by a statement reaffirming their continued respect for Ms. Markle's personal endeavors. Option 3. Total silence. A gamble that the media storm would burn out on its own. But silence was risky, because the press had already caught wind of tension between Netflix and the Sussexes. Leaked rumors about canceled projects, creative disagreements, and missed deadlines had been circling for months. Now, this hotel story added fuel to the narrative that Meghan's Hollywood charm was wearing thin. Perception is reality, the PR head reminded the room. If people believe we're fighting, then we are. If they believe we're covering for her, we look weak. A pause. Then someone from legal murmured, "So, what if we let the truth speak for itself?" That idea, simple, almost passive, became Netflix's unofficial strategy. They wouldn't issue a press release. They wouldn't pay the bill. They'd simply confirm nothing and deny nothing. But inside the company, a quiet shift began. Emails referencing Meghan were suddenly labeled sensitive. PR staff were told to monitor all Archewell mentions. Finance froze pending reimbursements tied to non-production-related expenses. It wasn't an official freeze, just a bureaucratic slowdown. But everyone knew what it meant. Netflix was done being the safety net. And Meghan felt it. According to sources close to her circle, she was blindsided by the sudden chill. Calls that used to be returned within hours were now taking days. Her team's emails to Netflix execs went unanswered. She reportedly told a friend, "They're turning on me." And perhaps she wasn't entirely wrong. Inside Netflix, executives were divided, not just about Meghan, but about what she represented. Some saw her as a necessary risk. Controversial, yes, but still a magnet for global attention. Others saw her as a ticking time bomb, threatening to drag Netflix's reputation into every tabloid headline that followed her. As one insider reportedly put it, she's not content anymore. She is the content, and that's dangerous. Meanwhile, the hotel story refused to die. It started creeping into mainstream outlets, BBC gossip columns, Page 6, French tabloids. Each version exaggerated slightly, adding new alleged details. Unpaid champagne tabs, missing jewelry, a heated argument at checkout, none confirmed, but none denied either. And as the noise grew louder, Netflix's silence grew more strategic. They weren't defending her, but they weren't denying her either. They were watching, waiting, calculating. One internal memo even stated, "Media focus on Archewell remains volatile. Avoid direct engagement. Monitor tone shifts across international markets." Translation, let her hang in the wind and see where the public lands. And the public? They were turning. Social media users, once enchanted by the fairy tale of Harry and Meghan, began to show fatigue. "It's always drama," one commenter wrote. "Everywhere she goes, there's a problem." Another quipped, "She's living on Netflix's dime and still playing the victim." It wasn't cruelty. It was exhaustion. The narrative that once empowered her was now suffocating her. And Netflix, quietly, was taking notes. They began focusing their resources on other royal-related projects, documentaries about Diana, dramas inspired by British monarchy scandals, all without direct Sussex involvement. A subtle shift, but unmistakable. As one producer put it, they're keeping the royal content alive, just not their royal content. Meanwhile, inside Meghan's camp, frustration turned into suspicion. She reportedly felt that Netflix had used her name, her story, her pain, and now, when she needed them most, they were hiding behind lawyers and loopholes. To her, this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was betrayal. But from Netflix's point of view, it was business. She had become unpredictable, a PR risk, a controversy magnet. Every public appearance came with baggage. And now, after Paris, their patience was wearing thin. So they made a subtle, powerful move. Internal communication stopped referring to Meghan and Harry as partners. They were now external talent. A single change in terminology, but it spoke volumes. From that moment, Meghan was no longer an extension of the Netflix brand. She was a separate entity, and the Duchess knew it. According to one insider, Meghan called an emergency meeting with her own PR advisors. The mood was grim. She reportedly said, "They're trying to erase me. I won't let them." But what could she do? Netflix had the leverage. They had the money, the contracts, the global reach. And they had the narrative power, the ability to decide whether she appeared as a partner or a problem. That's when things took a darker turn. Because while Meghan's team was scrambling to contain the fallout, a journalist in Los Angeles got their hands on a leaked copy of Netflix's internal finance memo. It mentioned non-contractual expenditures in Paris and a need for stricter expense oversight. Again, no names. But no one was fooled. The article went viral within hours. Headline screamed, "Netflix tightens controls after Meghan Markle Paris scandal. Duchess's expenses under scrutiny following $10,000 dispute." Suddenly, Meghan's silence became the story. Would she respond? Would she deny it? Her team debated. Some urged her to issue a statement blaming miscommunication. Others warned that addressing it would only amplify the story. Meghan herself was torn, furious, embarrassed, and cornered. She'd wanted Paris to be her comeback. Instead, it had become her undoing. And the worst part? Netflix wasn't even answering her calls anymore. Inside the company, executives were already moving on to new priorities. But privately, they agreed on one thing. The Archwell partnership would never be the same again. One senior exec reportedly said, "We'll finish the existing projects. But after this, no renewals. Too risky." That was the moment the relationship truly ended, not with a public fallout, but with quiet, corporate indifference. And while Meghan's team plotted her next move, Netflix's PR department was already preparing theirs, a carefully worded response that would distance the company just enough to protect its reputation without triggering open war. But Meghan wasn't about to stay silent forever. Because just as Netflix believed they'd contained the situation, she decided to strike back, in her own way, on her own terms, with her own story. And that story, once unleashed, would leave Hollywood stunned, and Netflix scrambling to respond. But no one could have predicted the bombshell that came next. Because the leaked memo wasn't the end of the Netflix-Meghan saga. It was just the beginning. And what happened when Meghan decided to confront Netflix directly would set off a chain reaction that neither side could control. Because in the war between image and integrity, someone always loses. And this time, it was about to get personal. It started with a whisper, the kind that moves through Hollywood like smoke. Invisible at first, but impossible to ignore once it catches flame. Someone, somewhere inside Netflix, had leaked it. A single memo. Just 4 paragraphs. But those 4 paragraphs sent shockwaves across the entertainment world. The memo wasn't intended for public eyes. It was an internal communication, a confidential advisory, meant for select Netflix executives, financial officers, and public relations staff. But within 48 hours, it landed in the inbox of one of Hollywood's most notorious entertainment journalists. And the moment they read the subject line, they knew they had gold. Talent expense oversight and external travel protocols. To an outsider, it sounded harmless, bureaucratic, even boring. But buried within those lines was a subtle reference that everyone in the industry could decode. Effective immediately, all expense reimbursements tied to external talent not engaged in active production will require double authorization from the finance and legal departments. Special attention is advised for any incidents involving international travel or public representation under Netflix branding. In other words, the Meghan Markle clause. The journalist didn't hesitate. Within hours, screenshots began circulating. By morning, the memo had made headlines. Netflix memo targets Meghan Markle after Paris hotel dispute. Leaked Netflix email reveals friction with Duchess over expenses. Special attention advised. Netflix tightens grip on high-profile talent spending. Suddenly, it wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was official. Netflix wasn't happy. And Meghan Markle was the reason why. Inside her Montecito home, the reaction was immediate. Aides scrambled to brief her. Publicists drafted responses, and lawyers examined the leak for possible defamation. Meghan, according to one insider, was furious beyond words. She reportedly said, "They're trying to humiliate me. They're punishing me in public." But from Netflix's perspective, they hadn't said a word. That was the brilliance and cruelty of the memo. It never mentioned her by name. It didn't accuse, it didn't blame, it didn't even allude directly. But every insider, every analyst, every gossip columnist could read between the lines. It was a silent warning, not just to Meghan, but to everyone in Hollywood who thought their fame could outshine corporate discipline. Netflix had drawn a line in the sand. And for the first time, Meghan wasn't the one controlling the narrative. Let's rewind. A few months earlier, Meghan's brand was everywhere: glossy magazine covers, podcast interviews, high-profile appearances. Her partnership with Netflix was still her biggest bargaining chip, the proof that she was more than a royal exile. She was a global brand. But now, that alliance had turned icy. Inside Netflix's offices, there was quiet satisfaction. Not gloating, not cruelty, just relief. The memo had done what press statements never could. It set boundaries without starting a war. It reasserted control. Executives called it necessary housecleaning. Others privately called it a reset. But not everyone agreed. Some felt uneasy. They worried that the leak made Netflix look vindictive. That even without naming names, the timing was too convenient, too pointed. Everyone knows this is about her. One executive reportedly said in frustration, "We're pretending it's a coincidence, but no one believes that." And yet, the PR strategy held firm. Netflix went silent. No denials, no clarifications, no interviews. They let the media feed itself. And feed it did. Entertainment networks dissected the memo word by word. Royal commentators compared it to the palace's way of sending coded public messages. Even former Netflix employees began giving anonymous quotes to tabloids, describing months of internal frustration and budget tightening that coincided with Meghan's projects. The narrative was spinning, and this time, Meghan wasn't the one holding the camera. Meanwhile, inside Archewell, panic turned to paranoia. Her advisors began questioning who could have leaked it. Was it an insider from Netflix trying to damage her reputation? Was it a disgruntled staffer from her own team? Or worse, was it intentional, a corporate strategy to force her hand? One insider reportedly said she felt betrayed. Every email, every text, every phone call suddenly seemed suspicious. She told us to check everything twice. And so, the Duchess went into damage control mode. Her first instinct was to fight back. Her lawyers began drafting a letter requesting Netflix to clarify that the memo had no connection to her. Her PR team floated the idea of a controlled interview, a sit-down with a friendly journalist where she could address this so-called leak in her own words. But cooler heads prevailed. Her closest advisor allegedly told her, "If you speak, you give it life. If you stay silent, they'll move on." So she stayed quiet, for now. But silence didn't mean surrender. Behind the scenes, Meghan's team began gathering their own receipts. Travel emails, booking confirmations, contractual notes. They wanted to prove that the Paris trip was connected to her Netflix brand discussions. That Netflix was unfairly distancing itself after the fact. The irony? In trying to protect her reputation, she was unknowingly proving Netflix's point. That her life had blurred the line between personal and professional so completely that even she couldn't separate them anymore. Meanwhile, the world watched. Public sentiment was shifting again. Fans expressed sympathy. Why is Netflix throwing her under the bus? Critics saw karma. This is what happens when the spotlight becomes your shield. The tabloids were relentless. Every new headline dissected her spending habits, her travel, her team. Photos of Meghan at the Balenciaga show were now repurposed as evidence of extravagance. $10,000 suite, $7,000 outfit, $0 accountability. It wasn't fair, perhaps, but that's how perception works in the age of scandal. And as the days passed, something unexpected happened. The palace stayed silent too. No comment from Buckingham, no leaks from Kensington. But insiders hinted that behind the scenes, there was quiet satisfaction. "They don't need to say anything," one royal correspondent noted. "The optics are doing the job for them." For Netflix, the situation was delicate but under control. The leak, though unplanned, had reinforced their boundaries. Meghan had become a symbol, not of failure, but of corporate caution. Still, one person inside Netflix wasn't entirely at ease. A mid-level communications staffer, the one who first flagged the hotel email, began receiving calls from journalists. They offered money, protection, anonymity. "You don't have to confirm anything," they'd say. "Just tell us what the mood was like in the office." He didn't answer. But one night, feeling guilty or perhaps proud, he confided to a friend, "It wasn't about her, you know. It was about control. Netflix was losing it." And she reminded them that no one is bigger than the brand. That quote would later surface in an article, misattributed, of course, but it summed up the entire dynamic perfectly. Because that's what this chapter of Meghan's life was really about: control. From the palace to Hollywood, she'd always fought to control her narrative. Every photo, every word, every smile, curated. But in the world of corporations, control doesn't belong to the face on the screen. It belongs to the signature on the contract. And Meghan had just been reminded of that, brutally, publicly, and permanently. In Montecito, friends say she withdrew for days. She spent hours on the phone with her mother, Doria. She reportedly told her, "They're making me look like I'm irresponsible, like I'm some spoiled diva." Doria, ever the voice of calm, allegedly said, "Then don't give them a reason to." But the damage was done. Netflix's memo had drawn the battle lines. Meghan's silence had been interpreted as guilt, and the world had already moved to the next phase: speculation. What would Netflix do next? Would they cut ties? Would Meghan retaliate? Behind the scenes, both sides were preparing for those exact possibilities. Netflix tightened their internal communications even further, encrypting emails, limiting access, scheduling media response simulations. They were ready for war, but hoping to avoid it. And Meghan? She was preparing her counterattack, not with lawyers this time, but with something far more powerful: storytelling. Rumors began swirling that she was developing a documentary pitch, her own version of the truth, centered around media manipulation, fame, and female misrepresentation. Her team pitched it quietly to streaming competitors. Some believed it was a bluff. Others believed it was revenge. Either way, the tension was undeniable. Because this was no longer just about an unpaid bill. It was about narrative dominance. About who got to tell the story, and whose version the world would believe. And somewhere, deep in the heart of Netflix's PR department, someone muttered what everyone else was thinking: "This isn't over." Not by a long shot. And they were right. Because as the dust from the memo settled, something new was brewing. A media storm that would drag Netflix, Meghan, and even the French hotel back into the headlines again. And this time, the world wouldn't just read about it, they'd see it. Because Meghan Markle was about to do what she did best: turn scandal into spectacle. But what she didn't realize was that Netflix had one last move left. And when they played it, even she would be caught off guard. What came next would blur the line between truth and revenge, and forever change the way Hollywood viewed the Duchess of Sussex. But no one, not even Meghan herself, saw it coming. The first sign of trouble wasn't a phone call from Netflix, nor the leaked memo. It was a vibration. Dozens of phones buzzing simultaneously inside a dimly lit conference room at Archewell's PR office in Los Angeles. One after another, Meghan Markle's team watched as notifications flooded their screens: headlines, tweets, alerts. The Netflix memo had gone public. And in less than 10 minutes, the world knew. Netflix tightens control after Duchess spending scandal. Streaming giant distances itself from Meghan Markle following unpaid Paris bill. Duchess under fire, PR nightmare for Archewell. The silence that followed was suffocating. Meghan's head of communications, a sharp ex-Hollywood publicist named Claire Weston, slammed her phone down on the table. "Who leaked this?" she hissed. "Who the hell leaked this memo?" No one spoke. They all knew the truth. It didn't matter who leaked it. What mattered was what came next. Because this wasn't just another rumor swirling in the tabloids. This was corporate, strategic, and worst of all, believable. Netflix hadn't said her name, but they didn't need to. The world could read between the lines. For a brand built on precision and image, this was an existential threat. Meghan's name was trending globally for all the wrong reasons, again. And in PR, perception is everything. Claire exhaled sharply, trying to steady her voice. "Okay, here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to panic publicly. We're not going to issue a defensive statement. We'll control the narrative." But inside, she knew that was easier said than done. Controlling a story that had already escaped into the bloodstream of the internet was like trying to stop a wildfire with perfume. You might mask the smoke for a moment, but the fire only burns hotter. Across the table, Meghan's social media strategist scrolled frantically through Twitter. #Netflix memo is already trending. People are saying Netflix is cutting ties. Royal accounts are piling on. Meghan's name was everywhere. Memes, opinion threads, YouTube reaction videos. Each one dissecting the story. Each one framing her as either a victim or a manipulator. Give me an update on the Paris angle, Claire demanded. What's the hotel saying now? Their spokesperson gave a vague statement this morning, replied her junior PR assistant, reading from a notepad. We uphold the highest standards of discretion and fairness for all guests. That's it. Which means, Claire muttered, they're not denying it. Meghan entered the room 10 minutes later, immaculate as always, but visibly tense. She carried her phone in one hand, a stack of printed articles in the other. Okay, she said flatly, placing them on the table. Let's fix this. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. Behind the poised exterior, she was livid. The Paris trip, the unpaid bill, the Netflix silence, it all felt like an ambush. She looked at Claire. How bad is it? Claire hesitated, then said the one thing every PR strategist dreads having to admit. It's worse than it looks. Meghan frowned. Define worse. The story's gone global. Every major outlet's running it. BBC, Variety, People, Page 6. The memo leaks being treated as confirmation that Netflix is done protecting you. Even your supporters are confused. Some think it's a smear campaign. Others, well, they think it's true. Meghan inhaled sharply. Of course it's not true. This was a clerical mistake. Netflix was supposed to handle that expense. Claire shook her head. Maybe, but they're not saying that now. And the more we talk about the money, the guiltier it sounds. This isn't about facts anymore, Meghan. It's about optics. Optics. That word again. It haunted Meghan more than any insult ever could. Because she understood it perfectly. She'd built her entire post-royal empire on optics. The power of image, story, control. And now, that empire was collapsing in real time. Okay, she said finally. Then we change the story. We pivot. How? Claire asked. By reframing it. This isn't about money. It's about a woman being targeted, again, for daring to step into a space that wasn't meant for her. Paris, fashion, success. They can't stand to see me thrive. She paused, her tone sharpening. We take back the narrative. The room exchanged cautious glances. It wasn't a bad idea. It was classic Meghan. Turn criticism into commentary. Victimhood into empowerment. But this time, the problem wasn't the message. It was the messenger. Netflix had the receipts, literally. And if the hotel released theirs, the sympathy angle could backfire. Still, the team went to work. Emails flew out to friendly journalists in the US and Canada, hinting that Meghan was once again the target of sexist, elitist double standards. Draft statements were prepared, just in case she needed to go public. Hashtags were tested. Old photos from Paris were quietly edited and reposted. Captions about female resilience, creativity, and confidence. The idea was simple: drown the controversy in positivity. But the internet isn't kind to carefully curated spin. Within hours, critics began mocking the effort. Resilience doesn't pay hotel bills, one user tweeted. Another wrote, how can someone this media-savvy keep tripping over her own PR? It was brutal and relentless. Meanwhile, Netflix's silence grew louder. Reporters kept calling for comment. Did the Duchess breach her contract? Has Netflix suspended her partnership? Each time, the company repeated the same neutral line. We don't comment on internal communications or talent expenses. But neutrality, in a media war, sounds like confirmation. Claire knew it. Meghan knew it. The entire team knew it. By evening, morale had cratered. Meghan's stylist was in tears after paparazzi ambushed her in Beverly Hills. Her assistant couldn't sleep, terrified of being blamed for the original mix-up. And Claire, the steady strategist, was now nursing a migraine and a cup of cold coffee, muttering, we're losing control of the narrative. That night, Meghan sat in her Montecito study, scrolling through headlines alone. The contrast was striking. Photos of her smiling in Paris juxtaposed against brutal captions. The Duchess and the debt. Meghan's $10,000 Fashion Week scandal. Netflix memo signals the end of an era. Her jaw tightened. They think I'll crumble, she whispered. But I won't. She picked up her phone and dialed a number, a direct line to a well-known Hollywood journalist she'd once trusted. The call lasted only 6 minutes. The next morning, a sympathetic article appeared online. The headline read, Meghan Markle faces media witch hunt. Inside the truth behind the Netflix leak. The piece painted her as misunderstood, overworked, and unfairly scapegoated by corporate elites. It quoted an unnamed insider who said, "She's always the first to be blamed and the last to be heard." For a few hours, it worked. The narrative softened. Supportive hashtags resurfaced. Influencers posted messages like, "They can't silence strong women." But then, the hotel issued a quiet follow-up statement, short, elegant, and devastating. "We have received confirmation that all outstanding accounts associated with Ms. Markle's stay have now been settled. We appreciate the cooperation of all parties." Translation: she paid up, but only after being caught. The internet pounced. "Confirmation of guilt," one tabloid declared. "Damage control," another said. Within hours, the sympathetic article was buried under a new wave of headlines. Hotel confirms Meghan Markle paid after delay. Netflix memo pressure forces Duchess to settle bill. Crisis PR fails to contain fallout. The PR team went silent. They'd run out of moves. At Archwell's next internal meeting, the tone was grim. Meghan sat at the head of the table, stone-faced. Claire delivered the summary. The Paris issue is now closed financially, but the reputational damage remains. Netflix hasn't made contact. They're observing, but they're not intervening. "So they're ghosting me," Meghan said quietly. "No," Claire replied softly. "They're waiting." "For what?" "For your next mistake." The words hung in the air. And Meghan, for all her media training, her experience, her mastery of narrative, didn't have an immediate answer.